The genetics here are pretty unique. They're some of the descendants of the originals that were brought over by Ototitsi back in the 1800s, some of the last free-roaming bison in the state of Montana. When the herd grew to a number and used to free range here in the Flathead Valley, they grew to a number of around 700 animals. When allotment was forced upon the reservation, the land was no longer free and available for free-roaming livestock. So at that point, the Allards and Pablo herd at that point, they were forced to round them up and sell them off. Genetics are very unique in bison also, as they are some of the purest of the bison themselves. There are very few genes that are integrated with cattle, so it's very important for the species conservation and very important for this herd especially. So when we start the gathering or pre-gathering week before or so, the bison are already kind of moving into the area that we need them. By the time they get to where they need to go out on horseback and gather more of the bison, that's some of the final push. The horses enable us to get into areas where mechanical vehicles such as four-wheelers and trucks and people really can't get into unless you have a pretty agile animal to also follow the bison. When they use the horses, it's more of a slow push for this herd. We try to work them as slow and calm as possible. And that way we don't have big runaways on it. And that ends up either hurting the animals themselves or some of the infrastructure on the bison range. They used to use the horses to run them down the chute system when they first cut them out of their herd. And they ran them at a full gallop. It was a high-stress situation both for the guys that were working the animals and cutting them and for the bison. In the past, I had seen several animals break legs doing this, and once they break a leg, we have to euthanize them. The low-stress handling was brought to us prior to our management of the bison range again. We were basically taught by the same person that taught Fish and Wildlife Service in the years previous, before the management takeover. It's a way to reduce injuries on both the people working the bison and the bisons themselves. We don't stress the bison out as we bring them down into the chute system, and everything goes a lot smoother for both the animals and the crew working them. It saves so much time, and it is so much easier on the animals, both health-wise and anxiety-wise. The corral was designed in order to keep the animals from escaping, basically. Their old corral systems were railroad ties and rough-cut lumber. It was old and outdated. Everything was manual on it, and it was a slow process. The new corral system that's in place now was built into the 90s, and it was constructed by the Fish and Wildlife Service workers themselves that worked here. But the Fish and Wildlife Service had gotten some surplus guardrails and I-beams, and they decided to use them instead because they were probably the best materials you could use without breaking down in a couple of years. Their longevity has stood the test of time and is still going strong. So it was probably a really good choice in materials and design. There are some things that we do want to change on it a little bit here and there just to make it run a little smoother, but in all, it's a really good design. So once we get them to the corral system, which is in parts, you've got larger holding pens as part of some of the rotational grazing areas, but we can contain them in there for a day or two before the bison roundup. This way it gives us a way of keeping them all together, and so we can pull the herd apart into smaller portions when we work them. Once we start breaking them down into smaller herds, we bring them down into the chutes themselves. They get run through a chute system where it starts out in sorting. They're sorted off to a couple of animals at a time, and then they are brought in to the chute system itself. The first spot they're going to stop is what we call the hub. That's where we kind of sort off the animals individually. Here's where we first get the identification from either the microchip and or the ear tag if we can get close enough to them. And that way we can link them back to the database from the past history. We also do a health assessment at that time and determine whether that animal is part of this year's health assessment for blood draw and disease testing and or is going to be culled for herd population. Not all of the bison will go through the squeeze chute. Some of them are just slated to go right straight back to the range after they come in. It's more of we get a check-in with them basically. It tells us that they're still alive and they're still how they're doing health-wise and body-wise. Some of them will just go straight back to the range, and some of them will get sent to the chute, whether they've got blood that needs to be pulled for health assessment and disease, and or they have existing condition at the time that we can maybe treat, maybe a gore wound or some pink eye. If we catch the pink eye soon enough, we can save the bison's eyesight. If not, they will have an ulcer on one eye or the other, and so they will lose partial sight out of that eye. It's a way for us to kind of manage our herd and try to keep them as healthy as possible. Most of the bison that are auctioned off go to private herds. They add to their genetic pool and or give their herds a genetic boost. We do have a few that end up going to slaughterhouses for meat sales also. But I would say the majority of them go to other private herds and help out with their genetic diversity. Our goal for auctioned animals is purely random. What we do look at is the age structure classes and see what we have kind of a surplus in. I like to keep my herd about 50-50 in sexes, and then also you got to keep about a third old animals, a third medium aged, and a third young. So for the herd health itself, it's population dynamics, family wise, it helps out keep a stable herd. You keep enough old animals in the herd to teach the young animals the ropes basically as they grow up. If you've got a good herd and they're not causing problems, more than likely is going to be passed down to the younger generations. And it keeps a hierarchy in the breeding status also. Not all of your older animals are going to be breeding, but if you got too many bulls in there, you're not producing a lot of calves. If you have too many cows in there and too few bulls, then your genetics are going to get squeezed down to just several single lines, and so your diversity in genetics is going to shrink also. So if you keep that mix in there, you keep a healthy herd. If we weren't doing the gathering, we wouldn't get the information that we do off of the herd. The health implications alone could be devastating. If we don't do this type of thing with this herd, we could be missing out on something that's slowly creeping into the herd, whether it's bacterial or viral or hereditary that's going on also. It could end up having far-reaching health implications for the herd themselves. This way, if we do work them at least every 2 years, we do get somewhat of a picture on how they are health-wise, and it gives us a sense of what our population looks like, age structure-wise also. The management of the Bison Range push was started clear back in the 80s when I was still in school. The tribe had lost this land to allotment, and also it was the Bison Range itself was pulled out from underneath us in the history of the reservation here as a bison refuge. So in order to get all that back, and that's just tremendous for the tribes themselves. It symbolizes the very beginning when a tribal member brought the orphaned calves back. It's kind of come full circle. So, we've got the herd back, we've got the land back, and it means a lot to the tribes, and it means a lot to me to be the one in charge of running the herd. So it's just a tremendous opportunity for us all. That's a testament to the people that work with the tribe and the dedication of the people that come in and volunteer for us. I mean, we've got top-rate people working in these fields, and it's a chance for us to prove this. We can manage animals. We do have the quality people to do it. And I think give us a few years and, that's going to shine through more and more. It's a kind of a testament to the wildlife program and the tribe in itself is we were given a chance to redo it. So let's capture that and run with it.